So the first video I made for TYT Nation, I responded to a video that asked the question, are Americans stupid? And my conclusion was that stupidity of Americans was generally acknowledged across the board, even though people tended to pay lip service to the contrary. Now, like I said then, I don't think Americans are stupid. I think people aren't thinking critically. And I didn't parse out the difference then between those two concepts, and I won't today either. I'll use them interchangeably. For today's purposes, those differences aren't of any consequence. Now, not only is it acknowledged that Americans are stupid or not thinking critically, it's also cynically used by some people and even promoted by others. For instance, I was driving home the other night. It was really late, and one of the radio stations in town has a psychic that comes on, and people call in and they get their fortune told. And the promo before the commercial for the show said, "It's not a coincidence if a prediction comes true." Now, most of you probably know that it still could be a coincidence, especially when the predictions are so vague and broad that they almost by definition have to come true. It's like when you read an astrology sign and it says you're going to meet somebody new. Of course you're going to meet somebody new. Now, a lot of people realize that things like this are ridiculous, but there are a good number of people who waste a lot of their money on this sort of voodoo. Some of you may remember Miss Cleo from several years back, who had a call-in line which charged like $5 a minute for people to get their fortunes told. So here you have a very lucrative enterprise that depends on people not using their heads. So there are those who depend on this sort of thing to make a living. And then you have institutions in our society that actively promote the dulling of your facets of inquiry, perhaps because they themselves are so saturated in irrationality that they don't even realize what they're doing. Take, for instance, the Texas GOP, which just adopted in its platform the pledge to ban critical thinking from public schools. Apparently they think this is in their best interest, and they're probably right. But it's worth noting that they also did this in reference to parents. They probably do actually think it's a good idea to take your parents' word for everything and not to doubt them. In other words, it's a bad thing in and of itself to be thinking critically, and you should just take things on authority. They probably actually believe that. There are lots of examples of this in our society, but there's one man in America who perfectly embodies both of these principles. That man, ladies and gentlemen, is Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly is a champion of stupidity, in that he is both an advocate for and a benefactor of ignorance in society. Not only does his livelihood depend on stupid people, he has also stated without apology that being skeptical is a bad thing. Now, most people on the internet probably think that Bill O'Reilly is purely a dunce, and I could see how one could come to that conclusion. However, in some respects, he's actually a very intelligent man. He did go to Harvard, after all. So he is smart at times, but he's just incredibly cynical. This hit home for me about a year ago when I watched his analysis of the debt ceiling debacle.
Finally, the far left is accusing the Tea Party and others of extortion. That view articulated on CNN.
Instead of accepting some compromise that can get through the democratic process, what they're saying is, we'll blow up the country if you don't listen to us. We will hold hostage the credit of the United States, the good standing of the United States, and we'll blow it up.
Now, Bernie Goldberg will have more on that coming up.
Now, some of you may have caught that. When he says this view is articulated on CNN, he means one of CNN's paid opinion contributors, who has his own show, in this case Fareed Zakaria, articulated that position. To not make that distinction is incredibly disingenuous. It would be the equivalent of saying Fox News articulated this view.
This president, I think, has exposed himself as a guy over and over and over again who has a deep-seated hatred for white people or the white culture. I don't know what it is.
Of course, the whole point is to throw the entire network of CNN under the bus, because they are Fox News' competition after all. That's why Bernie Goldberg was coming on, so that they could bitch about the rest of the media. Now, if you want any other examples of this, I would suggest reading one of Bill O'Reilly's books. He publishes them about every 6 months. There's basically nothing to them, and he makes a ton of money off of them. So we know O'Reilly is incredibly cynical, but he also values stupidity for its own sake, thinks it's a good thing in and of itself. To figure this out, you only need to switch the subject to what else but religion. If you've only known Bill O'Reilly from him talking about religion, say you watched one of his debates with Richard Dawkins, I can see why you think he's a moron through and through. But he's more or less like any other person I've ever met. No matter how intelligent they otherwise are, they're speaking complete nonsense when they're defending their faith. Again, this is well attested to, but recently he took it to an entirely new level.
Have you ever doubted the existence of God? That personal question was recently asked by the Pew Research Center. The result? 68% of Americans under the age of 30 say they have never doubted the existence of God, but 31% have. And for the USA, that's a big number. And you combine the media, the selfishness of society, and the public school abdication, and of course, you're going to have secularism, and that's what we're seeing, right?
Well, look, I think it's important to note that this poll doesn't say that young people are disbelieving in God. It's that they're skeptical
More
of him.
skeptical, right.
Yes, exactly.
But that's where it begins.
That's where it begins. It begins with skepticism. Notice the attitude. Employing doubt and reason is a bad thing when you're discussing religion. Now, there are a couple of noteworthy things here. One, doesn't that strike you as incredibly insecure? If you're firm in your beliefs, shouldn't you invite outside scrutiny and be able to rise to the defense of your convictions? Two, even though not all religious people, or in this case Christians, share this attitude, it is innate in religion. There's the parable of doubting Thomas, believing in things unseen. Taking things on very little evidence is a fixed quality within religion. In this respect, in the respect that he values credulity, Bill O'Reilly is an excellent Christian. Now, on a side note, I've noticed in some of the comments on my videos on TYT Nation, people asked who I was and if I had a channel of my own. The answer is yes, I do. My channel is Scuba My Steve. My name is Stephen Michael Davis. Most people just call me Steve. I do make videos that I don't post on this forum, so if you'd like to see those, by all means subscribe. Thanks for watching.